Good morning and welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy and Mike. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, sir. How you doing?
Where has the time gone? We are already rolling out to February. I'm exhausted, dude. It's this year's got to slow down. We can't keep going at this pace. This is crazy. How are you doing? How are you holding up?
Oh, man, I'm kind of with you too, with updates, with things coming out, and then just things are building up normally. I had a little free time. I was like, I'm gonna miss it with some of the things that maybe you don't necessarily want to dive into. I mean, we could touch on all the new AI stuff, but we're not going to. We're not going to talk about
Oh my
DeepSeek
gosh, there's a bunch of
and
things.
jeez.
It's shaking. We touched on this, I think, like last week or something before we had a recorded episode. But man, it's really. I think they said something like it wiped $1 trillion off of the balance sheets of these AI companies. People are going to have to get smarter quicker about how to make these models more intelligent. It's getting competitive, I guess I would say. It's getting very competitive very quickly.
1,000%. I mean, and just the updates with OpenAI and this deep research. Finally, actually have some AI that's being useful, Mike.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
especially with all the updates with Fabric, you want to kind of stay ahead, not just what the blog's saying, but all the people that may be talking about a certain subject. Well, Google now has
Yeah.
something called deep research, not to be confused with OpenAI's deep research. Yes, they named it the same thing.
Man, come on, guys, get a little bit creative.
That's what I thought too. But regardless, this tool is simply you will say, "Hey, I want to find topics like people who've done examples of,
Mhm.
has anyone done a Fabric SQL database and being able to write with Power Apps?" And it basically will become an agent and scour the web for you, which is awesome. So we're getting there. We're getting there.
It's I don't know. AI is interesting to me because it feels like it's very capable right now, but it also it sometimes it does still feel like it needs to require a lot of extra learning or education to make sure that you can get to a place where you can use it effectively. And so I'm
Mhm.
not sure I'm there yet. I'm looking at my team, basically looking at my team going, we have Copilot for GitHub Copilot, which is awesome, by the way. It does a great job on things for code based things. But I understand a little bit how it works. Other team members on my company understand a bit more and use it more frequently. Others don't touch it, and so they're missing out on the opportunity. So what I'm kind of looking for is like, where's the techniques? Where's the best practices? Where's
Yeah.
the training that's going to help me to skill up my team? Because I think this is going to have to be part of our workflow moving forward. Is using AI to help us build net new things.
1,000%. I think we're actually finally getting there where they're actually going to be tools that are going to be more useful rather than a
Mhm.
random chat that I may have found. So
Yeah, agree. Awesome. Other topics for today. So, any news items from yourself, Tommy? Anything that you want to talk about, like newsworthy things?
Microsoft dishing out some things with monitoring and databases. I think I'm going to save that for another time.
There's been a little bit of
Um,
buzz around monitoring. You said monitoring and databases. What do you
mhm.
mean? What are you referring to about the
Yeah.
database side?
So a few things that they have now is you can actually see, not in the monitoring hub, I believe with SQL databases, but we can actually see like any mirroring that's been occurred, replication, the SQL databases, and they're just announced too the activation of billing for SQL databases.
Ooh, I
Did you
didn't
see
hear
that?
that yet. I didn't see that part. I thought you were going towards. I think there was a release from Microsoft on GitHub around. There's this new real time monitoring that's for the
Oh, yeah.
workspaces.
Another thing with SQL databases. Yeah.
I thought you were going down that route as well because I haven't quite figured out how to make it work yet, but it seems interesting.
Yeah. That's a whole other piece of what they're doing. But yeah, the SQL database billing, because right now, if you created up to 3 databases, you could do it for free, but it's going to be billed separately based on storage,
Interesting.
which we literally just talked about too.
Yes. I forgot about what we talked about on this one. Again, I'm a little foggy this morning. It's been a long.
Yeah, so we
Remind
literally
me
just talked
what we
last week how all the costs in Fabric really is based on processing, not based on the data you're actually storing. So
Correct.
And that's why it's been unique. But they're like, hey, it's a SQL database. You're not going to be able to cheat Azure. So since SQL database is native item in Fabric, it uses units like other workloads. But billing for compute charges and data storage will occur after February. So I believe this is the first artifact in Fabric that'll pay for the storage, not just compute.
Well, Lakehouse 2 also makes you pay for storage. It doesn't come for free.
Yeah. So billing and utilization, that's going to be a whole other thing that we can dive into because I know how much you love. Where's my cost coming from?
Yeah. I think it's important, especially if you don't have your Fabric workspaces broken out by department where you're trying to allocate cost towards. Like if you have one larger Fabric environment and you're trying to split that across multiple teams, you could have all that be a central IT cost center, but then none of the teams have skin in the game. I find this idea of like,
Right.
if the department doesn't have skin in the game, they just consume whatever they want to consume.
Yeah.
And it's someone else's bill. I don't care, right? We run out of capacity. That's not my fault. That's your fault. You need to turn up the capacity, right? And so it's one of these games of like, who's blaming who. So you kind of want the business unit to have some skin in the game on this one, where if they consume or build poor models or consume too much content or CUs on the capacity, you want them to kind of pay for it. Hey, by the way,
Yeah.
you're slowing yourself down because of this bad stuff. Improve your stuff and it will run better. So interesting things there. All right, what else you want to go with this, Tommy?
Man, I think I'm really to get started. So we had finally, again, it always feels like as soon as we finish our episodes for the week, we're like, we did good topics. That's when Microsoft, I think, is really watching us and going, all right, let's go drop the major 75-page update now.
Yeah, for the Fabric update.
The Fabric update is officially out for January the 1st of 2025. And just like we did before with Power BI, this is Power BI and more. We're just going to go through and do a very informal draft of our top features and kind of, again, the points don't matter here, but you only pick a few. And I believe that I started first last time. So, Mike, I don't know if you saw anything here.
Yeah, your video cut out there for a little bit.
Okay.
I'm not sure what you said, but
we'll jump in. Try again?
I'll start up here again on picking some topics here. So jumping in, let's do a draft. So in the past, we've done a draft around picking topics directly from the Microsoft blog. And I'll pick one topic, and then we'll kind of discuss a little bit, and then I'll kick it over to Tommy what he's going to pick for the draft. All right. Jumping in here, we will, let's see here. There's a lot of neat features here. One thing that just interested me here as I was looking at it, there's a link to the first ever Power BI Data Viz World Championships. I don't know what this is. Like, this is, what in the world is this, Tommy? Are you gonna participate, Tommy, in the first ever World Championships?
I wanted initially to participate in the hackathon. I'm all about these community-based, collaboration-based features. Mike, maybe we should do a podcast representing for this kind of thing. A little branding there too.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I'm looking at the World Championship. So more about this event, right? So it's in the blog. It actually points you to a community post that talks more about it. At the community post, it's talking about the Power BI Data Viz World Championships, 4 weeks, 4 finalists, and only 1 champion. You think you've got what it takes to create a stunning, beautiful, accessible data visualization? Get ready. Put your Power BI skills to the test in this ultimate data viz showdown. So it looks like it's interesting. It's going to be, the full details are coming soon. It looks like it's been announced on the Microsoft blog. They have a little link here for stay tuned. I'll put the link in the description here for the post around this. So if you think you've got the visualization chops, if you want to give your hand at trying to build an amazing Power BI visual, check it out. Maybe you could find your skills, your talent inside making all those super highly customized visuals. So I'll throw this link in the chat window here just for people to see if they want to participate in the World Championship. I'm not sure I will participate, Tommy. There's a lot going on in my world. At this point, I've got presentations. I'm speaking at the conference. I probably won't have time to prepare a visualization for that. I'd be interested to see.
Yeah.
I would like to see like what people do at like what I'd like to watch it. If nothing else, it would be interesting to watching. It feels like this is kind of like a take on like what Excel does. Excel has like a broadcasted live event around individuals building Excel sheets. Have you seen one of those before?
Yeah, I've seen it with Excel. I've seen it with even SharePoint has like a CLI tool that people get way more involved than they should. Um, I don't think Microsoft done a visual one. I know that the only thing I can actually think of that's been visual led by Microsoft, I think was just the gallery, but that really was never a contest.
Yeah, they never. I don't think they gave away things. It wasn't. They didn't make it like a competition thing, but they did have. They have galleries of like, hey, show your ideas. I'm already thinking in my mind. There's a couple individuals that I know build incredible stuff, and I would love to see what they produce or if they build something for this competition. So I'd be very, very curious to see what's going on here. I'm also thinking the reason they're doing the championship is to start drumming up some people building like, examples, good examples of reports and things like that as well.
Thousand
I don't
percent.
I don't do that as much because I already have my own gallery of things that we build. We have the theme generator that already builds great templates for you automatically. So that's kind of where I spend a lot of my time. But again, this is another point of this is like when you're building incredible visualizations, are you talking about standard reports? What's
Mhm.
acceptable here? How much can you bend the rules? Are you going to write an HTML visual that builds things? Like what are we looking
Yeah,
at here?
that's what Mike. That's exactly it. I don't want to see in there like there's amazing stuff you can do in Power BI, but the actual use and functionality. It's like, hey, this has 725 different objects on this page. Like that's
Yes.
neat, I guess, but how helpful really is that?
Well, it's nice to see what you can do with it, though. Like, I mean, I would agree. Like, you need to know like what the potential is, but I'd also argue if whoever is the winner, one of the conditions of being the winner of this would be you have to explain what you did. Like, you have to go in and tell us how you built it to some degree, right? That to me feels like that should be part of the requirements for winning. Is you get a 30-minute video with Microsoft to explain and show us through, like walk through the different things. That's one of my big pet peeves when I see amazing visuals. Like people just like post a little random video on LinkedIn and they're like, look at this credible report I built. I'm like, wow, that's amazing. They don't give you a download. You can't go pull apart the file. Like there's nowhere to go see what they built. And I'm like, well, there's no way for me to really learn this other than, okay, good job. You made a cool visual, but I can't understand what you did. And, or, how much time did you really spend? Like the background images have a lot to do with how these reports work really well. So
Mhm.
where do those background images come from? How'd you make them? Like there's other things I think I'd like to see about this that democratizes that knowledge on how to build things.
1,000%. So, and yeah, I'm looking to hear more because I would love to see more than just like the design. Because yeah, Mike, I'm not even putting my skin in the game if that's the case. Because yeah, definitely not going to win that way. But yeah, if we can actually see just like functionality, I love hackathons. You know, I mean, that's where my heart is. So
Mm-hmm.
interesting to see.
All right. That's my first pick. I think the first pick of this draft is there's going to be some interesting things around the Power BI Data Viz World Championship. I'm interested in looking at that. I hope it's broadcasted live or something. Like if it's not directly at Fabric Conference, I'd like to see it recorded and reshared somewhere else. So I'd like to take a look at it. All right, Tommy, up to you. Pick up another topic.
Ooh, Mike, I am gonna go with something that I think for both of us. I'm surprised you didn't start with this.
Copilot,
Uh,
standard prompt.
well, there's one or two ways. There's I can be a troll, or I'm just gonna go to the one that's probably the number one.
All right,
So
go ahead.
it is the folder support in Git is now available. So this is planned to start rolling out by mid-February.
Mm-hmm.
And really what it is it actually, if you have your folders in Power BI, the one place you actually can't use the folders is on Windows Explorer. They don't sync.
Mm,
Um,
sure.
which is fine, but
Yeah,
kind of,
it's not really helpful. Like,
not great either.
I mean, it's an incredibly frustrating experience to go from I have a workspace with everything organized, and then all of a sudden you deploy it, and then it's just one long list of all the items. That was very annoying. It's not helpful. So I think having the folders inside Git integration is incredibly useful. So I'm looking forward.
No,
That's a feature I'm for sure going to use.
1,000%. And I think too, we've come a long way when it comes to the Git integration and Microsoft Fabric. This is something we've always wanted. And Mike, I have to say, it is pretty seamless.
Mm-hmm. Well, and
So like what? Yeah.
I mean, what the principle here is, you can have a lot of artifacts in a workspace, right? You can put artifacts in a folder. All they're doing now, or at least my understanding is, what they're doing now is the Git integration from whatever, GitHub or Azure DevOps, is now just mirroring the same folder structure, right? So if you make a folder for sales samples or customer analysis or reporting, it's just mirroring the same folder structure as you're adding those objects into folders, just mirroring that in the Git integration, which makes a lot of sense because now you could basically build your Git integration around making folders inside Git, and it would automatically put your elements in folders if you're going that direction as well. So I'm really
Yeah.
excited about this.
And honestly, I'm going more and more to most things going from the SharePoint integration to really Git, which is strange too, because everything always just worked with SharePoint, right? Anytime I saved something.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there are a lot more steps, especially for internal data. It's still in preview. So I've had some issues where environments or certain things wouldn't sync. I'm like, oh, great. Now I have to learn about checkout branches a little more because I wanted to remove this and I got to go back. So
Mm-hmm.
this is actually interesting too. They're getting so far with the Git integration where, I mean, especially for me, it's got to be in GitHub. That's just the way life is. So that really opens up to a lot of people. But Mike, you and I both know Git is not, I wouldn't say for the faint of heart, even if it's all readily available now.
Well,
Let me ask you, yeah.
it's interesting that you mentioned that because I'm doing a talk. I've been accepted to do a talk at Microsoft Fabric Conference in Las Vegas this year, and I'll be doing it with Matthias Tierbach, who's really good at Git and Git integration. If you think about all the things that are contained inside a workspace, there's actually a lot more than just plainly turning on Git and the items in the workspace, right? Git can do, or deployment or CI/CD could do a lot more. We just don't have the capability in the UI today to do everything, right? For example, the workspace has a name. The workspace has a description. The workspace has a capacity attached to it. What if you wanted to control the capacity that is attached to the workspace? Control that, redeploy a different Fabric workspace capacity. You can't do a lot of these other things directly with the Git integration that we have today. Those are outside of the scope of Git. Git is really focusing on, you have a workspace and you're going to deploy items into the workspace. The Git integration today doesn't handle the data. So like if you're having different data changes here, if you really think about what Git should allow us to do, if you think about all the items in your workspace as like an encyclopedia, I know I'm dating myself here because people don't even what is an encyclopedia? You don't just Google it. Think of it like an encyclopedia, right? If I'm going to look up the letter C or something that has to start with the letter C, I would go to the book that is the letter C and pull it out, make my changes, and then read it and go put it back, right? That's the same concept that we kind of need with Git integration as well. I need to be able to check out like a portion of items in a workspace, not have to copy the whole thing over again. I should be able to check out only what I need, fix the change, and then put it back in. So interesting concepts coming. We're going to talk much more heavily around patterns in Git integration, how this works. There are some downsides, Tommy, I found with Git integration.
Do tell, because I can share the sentiment. What have you been finding?
Well, I found that there's a difference between Azure DevOps Git integration and GitHub integration. They both work as far as you're able to check in and check out all the items. That works fine. The difference is if you check out an item on Azure DevOps, it uses your credentials of you, Tommy, to show me that the change was made. So in the Git repo directly, it says Tommy checked something out, Tommy made a change and pushed it back in. If I check something out and make a change, it shows me that I made a change or I made a branch and changed some items in the repo. So it actually uses our identities to show on the branching inside Azure DevOps who's making the changes. When you use GitHub integration, because they're using a single user's principal ID, like a single user,
Yeah. Yep.
all the
Yep.
changes are made on behalf of like one single user. So yes, you can still track all the changes, but I don't know if it has been Tommy or it has been Michael who made the changes on the branching. Does that make sense?
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I guess DevOps is using Microsoft Entra,
It's using Enter ID. So
but
it knows who's making the changes.
yeah, but that same information is still available via GitHub, but like
Not
it still should tell you an account.
it just looks like everything under GitHub because you're using a service account. So when you connect to GitHub, the act of connecting through to GitHub, you go get a personal access token. You use that personal access token to link to the repo, which is fine. But it just means that when I commit a change or you commit a change, Tommy, it doesn't know who's committing the change. It's using the credentials of that common user. So there's no like, let's call it this way. There's no credential pass through on the Git integration, which is fine. Here's what I recommend though. If you're using Git integration, you just need to add in the description of the change, add your initials. Add some additional context to the commit messages that's saying who's making the change. And then you can go back and link it to, who's making the change. Because sometimes you're trying to go backwards and say, who broke something? Like what happened here? Did something get missed? Or you're trying to kind of debug, and maybe there's a bigger story of why something changed that I need to go reach out to, Bob
Yeah,
and say,
that's
hey Bob, something changed. What happened? Does that make sense?
and again, Microsoft owns GitHub, but it's a different account. But I know
Mhm.
that information, like who.
It's
Oh,
not even a
that's
different
frustrating.
account. It's a different account and it's a different authentication method. Like
Mm.
DevOps uses Entra ID. GitHub has its own. I mean, maybe it's Entra ID. I don't know, but GitHub has its own entirely a different identity provider. You log in with a different username. There's no guarantee that every single user can log in and have those details shown. For like, how would they know? How would they know what my GitHub login account is when I'm in a Microsoft Fabric workspace? You wouldn't. Right? Because it's literally a different email. I'm logging into PowerBI.com with an entirely different email address than I could be using for GitHub. Anyways, just an edge case thing that I found inside the Git integrations.
Wonderful. Well, dude, I didn't even think about the different Git accounts. I mean, it's been fine for me. That's not even a bug, I guess, too, but good to know. And I think too, if that's the worst thing right now, if people add their initials, fine, kind of thing. As long as let me just use GitHub, please.
Sure. All right. Have we beat that one to death enough?
All right, you're up, my friend.
All right, let's go to the next topic here. So, this is something, Tommy, you remember how we talked about the One Lake catalog? Remember in an episode we talked a little bit about this? We're like, oh, there's some things that we thought were missing, right? Guess what? The semantic model, table name, and column description are now inside the One Lake catalog.
Oh
So,
my goodness.
right? That was quick because a quick turnaround. So we directly talked, like when we were initially thinking about the One Lake catalog. I don't know how long ago was it, Tommy. You're gonna have to search the text
it's
one.
less than a month
Month?
ago.
Month ago?
Yeah.
Maybe about a month. Anyways, time's been flying by so fast. But anyways, I remember our conversation, Tommy. We had a conversation around, hey, look, it's really helpful to have the One Lake catalog, but there's almost minimal to no information in the One Lake catalog around what's the name of the column, where does the description show up. So I was very pleased to see the semantic model now. So if you have semantic models that are being shown inside the One Lake catalog, you now have the model table and column description, which I think is incredibly useful. This is the kind of the description can come right from the semantic model. It's already there. It exists, right? So this is one more reason why you should document your semantic models, because this can help users trying to discover the content. Where did this table come from? Why does it exist? What kind of transformations did you do? Are you filtering any information out from this table? Like that stuff's relevant now. And now people can actually discover it inside this kind of passive documentation tool, which
Oh
I
my.
really like.
I know. So I mean, when I saw this too, I immediately thought of we just talked about this not even a month ago. This is opening up a lot because Mike, do you know how many solutions there are right now, like third-party solutions? I've worked with clients where they bought a Google Chrome extension that they had to bring to everyone in the organization that went to a different tool that would hook up to Power BI so people get their documentation. This very convoluted way of just people trying to see what data am I looking at, not just the numbers, but those attributes that describe them. And again, this is one of those things where I know Apple does this a lot, where they update something and a lot of companies go away, a lot of product and services.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of those, because this has been one of the biggest things we've been trying to solve for. I'm going to update my Tableau editor macro too, Mike, because I have one right now that's pretty extensive for my measures, to give it
Yeah,
a pretty good business description.
sure.
And then the formula's like, it's nice. It
Well,
works really well.
let me ask you some questions here. Does how are you doing this? Are you auto generating something for every single measure or column, or are you actually letting like an input box show up and say, "Here's an input box, type in something"? Like, how are you
So
run?
yeah, I would choose a select measure, and then I do have a way to do the system prompt where you can say, "Hey,
Okay.
input things. This is going to
Yes.
explain more about this business or this, or that model." But for
Yeah.
the most part, what I found is really the normal base macro, if I'm binded for time, works great.
But I don't
And
understand. Like, how are you
yeah,
getting the text? How are you describing the measure? You're just saying enter the formula back in the measure and be done with it. Like, what do you? I don't understand how
yeah.
you're doing the description.
So all we're simply doing is adding a system prompt saying you're an assistant getting concise business definitions for Power BI measures.
Are you using
Um,
AI to generate that?
yeah, it's syncing up to OpenAI, dude.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
I was totally on a different left field here. You caught me off guard.
No, no, no.
I'm with you now. I was very
I
confused.
only talk about AI. Yeah, so
Okay,
that makes a
sorry.
little more sense now, doesn't it?
Now I'm much more with you. Okay, so you have a tabular editor script that reads a measure, sends some data to OpenAI. Hey, give me a business description of what this measure is doing. And then it comes back to tabular editor with the text of that description. And then you're just shoving it into the measure then at that point. Okay,
Yeah,
this makes more sense.
yeah.
I was under the impression you're just like had a script that just ran on its own and you weren't sending any other data somewhere. Are you also, let me just other pause here, note, are you sending it other information about the model, not just like the measure?
No,
Like,
so I do only selected measures, so it'll only
okay,
send the formula.
okay, gotcha. But you,
So
again, I'm spitballing here in my mind here for a moment, right?
yeah.
There's no reason you couldn't enhance this script to say, go get the table description,
Oh yeah.
go get the relationships of this model, and you could feed a little bit more text or a little bit more prompt to OpenAI and say, hey, here's the tables and their descriptions. Here's the relationships of each of these tables, how they join together. Here's the measure in this table. Write a description for this measure. Here's the formula for it, right? That you, I see Tommy here like this in my mind. I'm like, you could start from where you began and can continue to extend it.
Oh yeah, so I have one for tables, and I have one that could go look at all of the measures in a model. But yeah, to your point, now that we have this descriptor, you probably have to add a little more context for the AI to like understand a column. But measures are pretty easy because you have a formula, right? So it's going to be able to develop something pretty quickly. It's like, take a look at this measure, get a description. But yeah, so now this is something that I'm going to be planning to do, to add that to our nice little repo, because man, the columns too, especially the most important columns, like, hey, this is the one that we choose for when we count a member, it's
Mm-hmm.
based on this kind of thing. I'm sure there's an additional integration to do with AI, but for the most part, right now, I mean, this is going to be the first things that I would focus on. AI or ChatGPT is going to get way too general if I just give it a bunch of columns without any context to it, like
Sure,
custom
sure.
stuff.
It needs some
Um,
level of context.
yeah, and it's going to need a little something. That's why the measures work really well with, and then it provides that description, and then it provides a line, and then it shows the formula. So with a column, how do you give it like, hey, what should you write about this? This is a date. This shows dates on a Power BI report.
I don't need
Not
that anymore. Like that's just
yeah,
for
that's
AI.
exactly what it would say.
Yeah, I wouldn't want that. Not helpful. I need to give me a better definition of that.
1,000%.
Awesome. Anything else you'd want to kind of add on that one?
I'm excited. Hopefully we can. right now you can only view those descriptions on columns and tables. You cannot modify from the One Lake catalog, correct?
Say the question again.
So right now in the One Lake catalog, if I wanted, I can view the descriptions of a column and table, but I
But you
cannot
can't edit.
modify.
Correct. Right. Do I really want people? So I think. All right. So thoughts on this comment, Tommy? I
Mm-hmm.
do like what you say. I think the ability to go both directions into One Lake catalog and add definitions, and then also go into the semantic model and add those definitions, I think it's useful. Definitely think it's useful. I think the headache I would have here is who's really allowed to add those
Oh no,
descriptions,
I completely. I know where
right?
you're going. Yep.
And that's where I'm like, should it only be the owner of the data set? Do you have admins that can come in and do this? And I really do think, to your point, Tommy, right? What you've built in Tabular Editor with scripting to go to AI, OpenAI, Microsoft has all the data right there in front of them. Like this should be the Copilot feature where you just kind of drop in and run Copilot across your data catalog and say, here, make a bunch of descriptions. Because I think there's a psychological thing here as well. If you give a bunch of users pre-built descriptions, they'll tell you they're wrong. But if you give them no descriptions, they just won't say anything. It's too much time to go through all the descriptions and be like, nah, this is not helpful, right? I think there's a point of like people are more willing to correct you than they are to create it from scratch.
Oh yeah. Everyone likes to point out a problem.
Yes.
So interesting. Yeah, but and that is true. Even just getting something basic in there is better than nothing. People hate blanks. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. I'd agree with that one.
But I mean, I think we can add another role to your point. Who is actually allowed to do that? Well, you talk about the stewards. There's all that intermediary people who I never want them ever to look at the semantic model itself in terms of like, connecting to it in a tablet editor or building a report. That's just not their role.
Mm-hmm.
But they know about it. Like again, like their business may be all that account information. Those tables you look at, they have 75 columns. You're like, I don't care about any of them, but to the stakeholder, all of these are apparently important. Well, they're the ones who do that. So I'm sure what I would love to see, is a role created for, I know we already have contributor, but
like documentation, like
yeah, exactly. Steward, call it a steward kind of thing. So they can in the One Lake catalog go, modify the tables and columns and the measure descriptions.
Interesting. That's a neat feature there. I would have to kind of think through a little bit more of how I would want that to happen. And the other thing now with many different places, like so you could as you're saying that right now, Tommy, I'm thinking, what if someone was editing the model in a workspace and you're trying to modify catalog at the same time? How would that work? This co-authoring experience kind of needs to get figured out because I think you could run into conflicts of like, hey, Tommy's in there making changes to the descriptions. I'm also in the model, and I'm also making changes to the model, like adding measures or something. But how do we keep those two people in sync on the same model? So like that could be a little bit interesting there. Yeah, interesting, good stuff. All right, I think we've talked about this before, Tommy, and I'm not sure. Are you good on this topic? Because I don't want to rush you.
Oh yeah, I'm good.
Okay. I'm going to pick another winner on this list here. I think the Python notebooks. So pure Python notebooks, running them inside. So let me preface this a little bit here. When we talk about notebooks, there has been traditionally two runtime engines that run a notebook. You can do a Python notebook, which a PySpark, basically PySpark notebook. Let me correct myself. A PySpark notebook. PySpark runs Python on top of the Spark engine. That's what that does. Then there was a second runtime called the T-SQL notebook. So that's running T-SQL on a different runtime. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the SQL Server runtime. I don't know. But it's a notebook-like experience where you're writing straight T-SQL against lakehouses and tables and such. Okay, so that's the second engine we're talking about here. This introduction of just a pure Python notebook, no Spark involved. This is just Python. It's a different experience, right? It still runs like a notebook. It still acts like normal. It's initially supporting Python 3.11 and 3.10. So those are the Python libraries you can use with it. But it's optimized for resource utilization. Okay, so let me give you the context where I think these new Python notebooks make sense, right? I was doing some testing, Tommy. I
Okay.
like semantic link labs. It is so cool. Now, imagine you could run semantic link labs on not a Spark cluster, which has a worker and potentially a management node, right? So minimum two computers, right? Imagine now you could run all of that in a single machine on a single notebook, potentially costing you less compute units. So tasks that are kind of like lightweight, like I'm doing some automation around testing of things. I'm trying to pull great expectations in and use great expectations with my semantic model and talk to the semantic model. The semantic link works with the Python notebooks. I tested it. You can go use just this pure Python notebook and use semantic link and semantic link labs directly with that notebook. There's nothing fancy there that's happening. That means it doesn't run. So if I'm looking at this going, okay, I'm now making the decision, the notebook experience I love, it's great. But now I can even pick a very finely tuned process. Like if I'm not moving hundreds of millions of records or millions of records, I'm doing lightweight things. Why not use the Python notebook compared to the PySpark notebooks? It might save you some compute units. So I think this is not like it's necessarily a cost saving experience, but I like the idea that I can write Python in both experiences, the pure Python notebook and the PySpark notebooks, and get the same results. There's probably things somewhere in here that don't work in both notebook experiences, but I haven't found them yet. And I'm starting to test it more and more. So I'm really liking this new Python only notebook
Yeah.
experience.
So
Does that make sense what I'm saying?
no, yeah, and I was actually wanted to ask you in terms of sure, from the cost point of view. One of the things I've noticed with the PySpark engine is
Mhm.
if I'm testing things out, or if I'm like, okay, I got to modify the code,
Yeah.
like that time for it to start running, the amount of times I have out loud, because you're going to take 2 or 3 minutes just because I want to run a cell. And again, obviously, when we actually have the full pipeline, different story. But you're in a notebook too to probably tinker around. You don't have all the code already. You're just copy and pasting. A lot of people are like, "Hey, did this work? Did this work?"
Yes.
So, and just like in a normal, like a Jupyter notebook, right? Where it kind of just goes once it starts running. If I get coffee and come back to it, it's going to take another 3 minutes to start. Does the Python experience, in a sense, can be a good substitute for there? Or so you see where I'm going, where the Python experience can be a good substitute for that entire engine that I don't need when I'm just simply wanting to
Well,
look at something.
yeah, I think the answer here is like, what is the size of your job? How long does it need to run? Right? Are we talking about a very monolithic job that runs? To your point, Tommy, there's also another moment here where you start the notebook, right? If I have to start two virtual machines, a worker and a head node to run a notebook, well, it makes sense to me if I can just run the Python notebook and it's just one machine, one VM that I need to turn on.
Right.
That should be faster to turn on than two machines to that effect, right? So
Right.
one, it's a cost savings, but two, it's like a speed to access, a speed to get into using the experience. If I can just have one machine that's just available to me, great. That's easier for me to just spin up the machine and use the Python notebook there. So I think to your point, Tommy, right? It's part of this is cost savings, but part of it is the user experience. If it takes less time, 1 or 2 seconds to load the notebook, that's just that's another opportunity of a little bit less friction that just makes it easier for me to get started. Does that make sense?
That is exactly what I'm hoping in
Okay.
terms of the actual functions and everything else. Um, Really, from there, like it makes it sounds like it makes a lot of sense for people who are starting off. Would you then recommend them from going from straight, say, I'm going from Power Query to notebooks? That story. Would you
Ooh.
want? Yeah, 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 yeah.
I mean, so oh geez, Tommy, now we're getting into another big can.
Yeah.
When you move me from like data flows Gen 2, so there's data flows Gen 1, which doesn't talk to lake houses. I can't write data to a lake house. And then there's data flows Gen 2, which is like the experience of data flows Gen 2 now talks and writes data directly to lake houses. Awesome. Love it. there's comes a threshold where you're like, do I need to do more? Do I want to optimize more of my solution? And what I have found is if I run Python notebooks on top of my data versus Dataflow's Gen 2, it's more efficient to run those. And now I think with Python notebooks, pure Python notebooks, we also add another layer to this, right? Do I use Dataflow's Gen 2 or do I want to use a Python notebook? Where do I start? I would argue, here's my argument. My argument would be if you're just starting out using notebooks, maybe start with the Python only notebooks first, just because the odds of you doing big data right out of the gate is probably a little bit less on those first couple projects. My experience has been when organizations start to use Fabric, they pick small to medium sized projects that are reasonable in size. They're not like, okay, great. Now we have Fabric. Our first project should be like a 200 billion row table. Like that's I don't hear a lot of organizations like willing to jump in and like start with that, because in order to get to that level of knowledge of being able to handle that large of data inside Fabric, you're probably already bringing in solid data engineers who already understand big data technology, particularly Spark notebooks, and like you're bringing in the expertise already to get to that scale, right? Smaller organizations, I think, have the better opportunity here to start with these things in a smaller build. Does that make sense, Tommy?
And that's exactly what I was thinking
Okay.
too, right? Because for me, the most frustrating thing when I started getting into notebooks, it
Mhm.
was just a Spark environment where it's like, I'm just learning Python, man, and now I'm realizing that the column types in Spark are different than the ones in Pandas. Why, kind of thing.
Yes.
And I mean, you want to talk about, I have a few white hairs in the back to show for that. Little knickknack things like that, that
Mhm.
again, unless you come from that background where that was your life, how in the world would you know all those little things?
Right?
You're gonna
Exactly.
you're gonna get someone to go, I can do this in Power Query. It may take longer, but at least I can change a dang column type and push, like one works for a file, but I can't use that in a table.
I think there's a little bit of, I mean, if you think about like the proliferation of all the different tools that we can use to do things, right? Right. I can bring data into, I could send data to a Kusto database. I could use an event stream to then bring data in. I could load things in batch. I could bring things into a lakehouse, a Kusto database. I could use a Python notebook. I could use a PySpark notebook. I could use a T-SQL notebook. Like, this is really interesting. There's now a wide variety of tools, but I think the community in general has been like, why are we throwing everything at everything? Right. I think there's a little bit of a, um, you know, whoever can build the decision helper tool, right? Whoever can say, what is the workload you're trying to accomplish? And then give you like a routed path to say, this is the most efficient way to build a combination of this pattern, optimizing for compute or optimizing for storage or whatever that optimization thing is. There's now so many different routes to build the same stuff. We kind of need help a little bit. I think the community is pushing back a little bit on this Fabric experience. I've seen a couple of blog posts from people like, why are we really pushing Fabric so hard? We should really be focusing on just making Power BI better.
Oh my gosh, I love that. So yeah, I already put that as a topic too, because I looked at the limitations. It doesn't work with an environment fine, but it looks like everything else would work. And again, if you're talking about most people are making that transition, perfect.
Yeah. I'm going to actually
Good.
call someone who's made a comment in the chat here that I think is um, uh, really relevant here, right? So someone in the comment, Michael, makes a comment here. People are coming out of college and they're going to know Python, regular Python. That's like a very common language. And I would agree. I've also seen the same trend. A lot of schools immediately teach Python right away. So having just pure Python notebooks to do data engineering, I think is going to be a big win for Fabric, especially if you're in more of that technical computer space. I think that's going to be useful to us. I'd also argue like the two main tools I think that are in the market here are like anything that's SQL related and Python. I feel like those are the two main languages that everyone seems to have some knowledge about. And if I were a new user coming into Fabric or Power BI or thinking about starting my career, those would be two languages I would spend a lot of time just figuring out how to use and use them effectively. Python and SQL. If you can get your head around those two languages, I think you can do a lot inside the data space. So I think those are really interesting.
Yeah, and I think we'll say this for another day too, as we talk about this. A lot of people too are going to be probably used to an IDE, and actually probably some Copilot too, to help them out. So I know Microsoft's still working on the integration with notebooks and other tooling. Like, how often are you building notebooks in VS Code for Fabric, or are you doing that at all?
That's a good question, Tommy. I've had a little bit of friction there from
Mm-hmm.
my personal experience. So here's what I'd like the experience to look like. I would like to go into a Fabric workspace. I'd like to be able to pull open a Python or a PySpark notebook, and I want to click the button that says open in VS Code. What I want it to do is I want it to open that notebook in my VS Code locally on my machine, and then immediately connect to the cluster that is in the cloud service, right? So I want it to be seamless. I want to be able to click a button and just have the notebook open on my VS
1,000%.
Code and make it easy to connect back to that cluster. And then when I hit run, it doesn't run it on my machine. It runs it. It basically bundles like I don't know,
Like a Jupyter notebook or Jupyter Hub kind of thing. It just talks to the server.
yeah. It just bundles the command inside that command cell and just sends it to the server and then returns the results to me. Like that's what I want it to look like. But I've had some friction actually getting that to implement correctly, and so it hasn't really worked super smooth for me. And another reason, Tommy, I'd like to have that experience would be I have Copilot, GitHub Copilot for free.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you want to, you even pay for it and you get more advanced features from the GitHub Copilot featuring. So like, how rich would that be, right? I don't need to go buy Fabric's F64 to go get a Copilot. I could connect the notebook, bring it down to VS Code, write the code directly there locally, use VS Code GitHub Copilot. I find it super effective. That would be great. And then I can just push the notebook back up and then it's ready to go. Yeah, I agree with that. Let me, one other thought here too, Tommy, with the notebook experience, there's now also the announcement around live versioning for notebooks. Did you see that one as well? So
I did.
As we're talking about notebooks and this experience of like VS Code, like I would want it all kind of work together. But how cool would it be to have a notebook that also lets you live edit the notebook in VS Code and then also see the other guy's code editing there? Like that would be amazing.
That's fine, I guess. I mean, I know a lot of tools have that too. Do you see yourself using that a lot? And
I would argue code development together with other people in the same notebook is extremely useful. So you have two people on a team or you have a problem with some kind of notebook or some code, it's really useful to bring two engineers together and have them working in the same notebook where one person is building a different cell, you're testing things in another cell, and like you're kind of like hammering out a problem together. Sometimes that's really helpful. Or code reviews. I really think there's a lot of value for joint development together.
Interesting. Okay. Mike, I know we're getting into your time, but there's one that we haven't mentioned that I thought I'm actually blown away that this has not made it into your first or second round of the draft.
It probably should have. I think I know what you're talking. I think I know what you're going to allude to here. And I'm already probably using this feature heavily already, but go ahead.
I really doubt it. CI, this is the second announcement. This is actually what I'm about to introduce to you is someone who said they were eligible for the draft, went back for a year in college. CI/CD support for data flows in Fabric. Sound familiar?
Well, I feel like this is like the third announcement I've heard this one from. How did I miss this on the? Where the heck did they put this at the bottom? Like, where'd they put this one? I don't even see it.
If you look for, there's a section called data flows in the article. If you actually go to
all right,
right after Power BI,
let me just Control F data flows. Data flow Gen 2. Okay, so data flow Gen 2 has its own section.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Oh, I see. And okay, so there's a checkbox now. Enable Git integration for this deployment pipeline. Public API scenarios preview. Okay, I don't even know what that means, but okay. All right, I'm gonna hold my breath on this one. I feel like I've been hearing this one for months, trying to get this feature into Git. Hopefully it works. We'll see what happens, but interesting. I mean, this is very needed. It's been about time that Git's here.
But Mike, they even updated the block from November to say that we weren't going to introduce it in that week, but we waited till January. So even in the original block,
they're just refining. They were just polishing it for us, Tommy. There was a couple of things that you just need to finish so that we could be really happy with the CA. I thought you were going to say something about Tyndall editor. Honestly.
Oh, Tyndall.
Yeah, so there's the Tyndall editor in Power BI Desktop now, dude. I'm telling you, like, so.
Oh
Okay,
yeah, we talked about that in the
we did.
Okay, you got
When it came out,
honorable
we kind of
mention.
talked about it. It was released. I'd done a video on it on YouTube, which I think is awesome, by the way. Rui goes through and tells you exactly how to use
Yeah.
Tyndall editor and some good demos there. But like, okay, I'm gonna have a hard time choosing between Tyndall editor preview or CI/CD inside data flows.
Ooh, what? Wait, what? Elaborate. You're gonna have to explain because
It's a
why do you have to
it's a
choose?
two horse race at this point for me for those two, because Tyndall editor affects my day to day. Like it is 100% every day. I'm actually going into semantic models. I'm building models, and I'm dragging the entire semantic model into the Tyndall editor just to see how the model's built, like what features are turned on, what settings are there. This Tyndall editor gives me a whole another layer of view of data that I could never see before. I love it. I think the Tyndall editor is a great addition to Power BI Desktop. So much so that I'm changing my training material to reflect Tyndall editor as part of the new modeling experience. So now
Oh
so,
wow.
so to think about it, right? When you do report building, you're thinking about the report view of desktop. When you think about data modeling, you're thinking about the model view. But now I'm extending my documentation to also include DAX query view, also Tyndall editor. So these are other tools that are going to make it easier for you to make measures. I don't like writing measures anymore unless I'm using DAX query view. It's so much better.
Wow.
I'm telling you, I like, especially if you make like imagine you're doing like a sum on a
Yeah,
column
yeah.
and you have to write 3 measures. I could write all the measures all at once and just hit publish all measures to the model. Like, it's great. Like, these new code-based tools are changing how I work with semantic models. It's physically changing how I do things.
Man, you're gonna have to get me off a Tableau editor though. And so you're doing all this in Power BI Desktop.
That's what I'm so Tommy, to your point, you've done a lot of scripting inside Tableau Editor. Like, select this measure, select this column, run the script. That saves you a lot of time. I'm not saying that this is not going to help you in that way. But imagine if I didn't need to even write the script to begin with. Imagine if I could just script the entire table and its columns out into a Tyndall window. And I, instead of just, like, to your point, Tommy, like, I can't use OpenAI to send code to it. I just can't do that. But if I'm not that advanced of a person, if I'm not using OpenAI, if I'm not using scripting pieces like that, I just want to see all the columns and add descriptions to them. It's as easy as going through and adding some text in front of every column, and boom, it's already documented. And I hit push or update the model, and it pushes those changes right back in the model. It's super fluid. So yeah, Tabular Editor 3 and Tabular Editor 2 are going to still be like probably the premier tool around editing models. But I think the Tyndall editor is cutting into that business a lot. And I think there's a lot of new users to Power BI that will find immense value with those Tyndall editors. Yeah, Andrew's also commenting, Tyndall in desktop has been so useful. I'm saving time with using it. I'd rather write measures in Tyndall or DAX Query View than be building measures using the formula bar.
Well, let me ask you this, Mike. How much of your time you would actually say guesstimate the rate in desktop and the rate in VS Code right now? Or is this purely a desktop thing since they both support obviously the Tyndall?
A great question on that one. So the TMDL, or the Tyndall format, is supported in VS Code, but you have to save your Power BI file as a PBIR formatted file. So you can still use Tyndall. It's still in VS Code. It's just like a whole extra step, Tommy. Like, that's what I'm not like a big fan of. There's a whole nother step inside VS Code that requires this. Now, to your point, we should go talk to, who's the gentleman who makes the VS Code plugin for Fabric? You know who I'm talking about?
Yes, Greg Burkle. So yeah, or
Freckle?
Gerald. No, I
Gerhard.
Gerhard.
Sorry, it just took me a second to get there. So Gerhard does this really interesting Fabric add-in for VS Code. If he could add to that Fabric add-in the ability for you to send information to OpenAI or use scripting inside that to some degree, like with Tyndall, dude, I'm telling you, that would be amazing. Yeah, Gerhard is the name. Thanks, Greg. I appreciate the name call out there. You knew it faster than I knew it. Awesome. Anyways, those are my key topics. I think those are the ones that I think are most important here. And Tommy, I'm going to say it's going to be a hard choice for me. I don't know if I want to choose CI/CD with data flows Gen 2. It's been needed. Most of the world uses data flows in the business intelligence space from the Power BI side. People are going to want to move to data flows Gen 2, and if it's not supported, this is one major barrier that I've been talking about that has now been removed, and it's now a lot easier to now use the data flows Gen 2 inside Git, which I think is
absolutely insane.
It's the right approach. We knew we were going to get there. I just was
Yeah.
getting impatient. I wanted it now. I didn't want to wait for like months and months to have it show up.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's interesting with the Tyndall. Do you envision a world, Mike? And
I always envision the world.
Are you dreaming of a world where you're building your entire model like people build node projects and JavaScript, where there's literally no UI? All of this is just done in files and pages in a repo?
No, I don't think so. I think it's
All
more
right,
like,
all right.
I think it's more of like I'm going to make a co-pilot agent that will have the voice of Alex Powers, and I'll be able to just talk to Alex and be like, Alex, I need a model. Instead of co-pilot, it'd be like co-Alex. I need a model that does the XYZ things. And Alex will, in his gentle, kind tone, Michael, that's a dumb idea. I'll just build you the model that you actually need. Oh, and by the way, I'm going to make everything in Power Query just work better for you because you don't have a clue what you're doing. So that's the kind of co-pilot agent I need. I would rather. No, I'm being totally facetious here. I'm just teasing you, Tommy. I don't see a world where we're going to have a whole bunch of like pure code based building of models. I still think we're going to need some level of tooling there, but I do think using more things like Tyndall is very useful, and I think a lot of other tools are going to start adapting to that because it's to me every time they add a brand new feature into anything that's Power BI Desktop, the Tyndall format can cover it. Right? There's things Tyndall can do that other things that they don't have to build a UI for it now. Like imagine, Tommy, like you have the perspectives, right? You can't make a perspective in desktop. Well, at least you couldn't, but now you can because now the perspective lives as part of the semantic model, and you can script that out using Tyndall. So Tyndall scripts out perspectives. You can use that to build different languages on top of your model, which is awesome. Like that's what you want to do.
Sure.
But before I had no UI to do that. Like it just wasn't available to me. So, Tommy, where do we go with this one, right? Is there going to be an ability for us to script out things and pull in code samples and snippets from other places? I think that's where we need to go next, right? I want Tommy to figure out the scripting code that says, hey, Tommy's going to build an automation.
I know what you want.
You see what I'm saying? Like Tommy's going to build
I
want a community-based space where Tommy can build the scripts that he needs and I can just go use them when I want, right?
You want to be able to go and say, hey, download this package and this will install all your measures and your descriptions, just like a notepad. That's where we're going with this, where they're going to be package-based installations. It's going to do everything in your environment. So
I mean, maybe that's kind of the approach that they're taking with the notebooks right now with like Semantic Link and Semantic Link Labs. Like that's something that's potentially there. Like you just install the library and it's done and it works. But I don't know. I feel like the packaging piece that you're talking about, Tommy, is a little bit more dodgy.
I don't think I'm being completely serious about that, but it would be cool to automatically integrate stuff like that.
I will say this though, Tommy, to your credit here though, people are building Tyndall scripts and sharing them now. I just saw someone.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So people are now building Tyndall scripts. Like, hey, copy this Tyndall script and it will create your date table. Copy this Tyndall script and it will create something for you. So I do think there's a world. Okay. I do think there's a world where people are going to share Tyndall scripts. My challenge here with this is you kind of need a UI to help you a little bit, right? So sometimes these Tyndall scripts depend upon knowing something about your semantic model. Like a date table makes sense, right? Doesn't matter. You don't really need to know any information about your model other than I'm making a date table. Maybe you want to know the minimum and maximum date range to build out that Tyndall script. Maybe, right? But in other things, like if you're trying to build complex measures, if you're trying to build other complex things, you need to reference elements of the semantic model. And I don't think we have any tooling today that will help us do that easily. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think I think that's why Microsoft's pushed so hard over the last, I want to say the last 2 years to make Power BI text accessible. Because again, we live in a world where only the only way to really view things was binary through an application. And so I think that's where they realized that everything they do is in code. So
Mhm.
they just wanted to open it up. So yeah, it does open up a lot of different things, but just for the automation itself, man, if we stop there, I'm good.
All right. I like it. All right, with that, we've burned through a perfectly good monthly update. So this is our draft for January of 2025. We're trying to pick out the best features that we think are interesting that you want to look at, research more about, and go test. I for sure am going to go dig around. I'm going to go make a Dataflow Gen 2 right away. I'm going to go right to my Power BI environment. I'm going to go check this one out because that's a feature that I've been whining about for eons. I want to see if it works. So I'm going to definitely check that one out and see if I can get that to work with us. Anyways, that being said, thank you all so much for spending an hour of your time. I know your day is busy. I know you're doing a lot of other things. You could be doing other things like knitting a sweater and actually working at real work and maybe even going on a run or some exercise. So hopefully we've kept you a little bit busy during your day, entertained you a little bit here as we go along as well. Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
You can find us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to subscribe and leave a rating. It helps us out a ton. If you have a question, idea, or a topic that you want us to talk about in a future episode, head over to PowerBI.tips/podcast. Leave your name and a great question. And finally, join us live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Central, and join the conversation, all PowerBI.tips social media channels.
Excellent. Thank you all so much. Appreciate the chat. Thank you for engaging with us and saying comments and things as well. We do appreciate that. Thank you so much for participating. We'll see you next time.